as we kind of get started. We're talking about the chemicals in our food supply and how that impacts our children and how it impacts the health of the system. So you're just getting a little bit of behind the scenes right now as we get started.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Holistic Solution with Ferdinand and Dr. Steele. And today we're talking about kiddos and chemicals. And Dr. Steele, she's got a whole lot going on over there. She's got all these different platforms moving at the same time, getting great information to a lot of different people. So today we're talking about kiddos and chemicals. What's going on, Dr. Steele? How you doing?
It's just such an amazing day. It's just been the morning filled with love and peace. And I've already ran across one of my other students, which is really cool. And we were just sharing all about our decolonizing our healthcare system, because it's really about a mindset. So this show really is more centered around practical solutions for you and your family. And as we can see, we have a special guest.
Say hi, Trigger.
Hi, Mama.
And we also have a live audience of Elijah, Sincere, and Julie.
I love it. Yes, indeed.
So when we think about kiddos and chemicals, it brings me to one of the things it first brings me to is mental health. I was looking at through Jerry Falwell's library and some of the peer-reviewed articles, and there was a lot in there about ADHD, a lot in there about renal problems, kidney problems with children. Well, why are some of those kinds of problems happening, Dr. Steele?
So, it goes back to the demineralization of our soils, which we've talked about. We got away. Well, we didn't get away. We were colonized away from our original biodynamic farming practices, right? And that's where we use like the sun and the moon and astrology and all different things. And we let the soils rest and we loved on the soils. And we just there was a sacredness that we had, a union, a connection that we had to nature that has definitely been lost since we've been colonized and are now in our westernized worlds. And you'll look at the more westernized a culture is, the more detached they are from their original, healing practices. And so food is really our first healing practice. So having a food supply that doesn't have enough nutrients, and then on top of that is now loaded with toxins, that really creates a lot of impact on the system as a whole, but especially the nervous system.
Absolutely. It was blowing my mind. I mean, I already knew that we were having a metabolic acidosis problem and a demineralization problem, but I didn't realize how bad it was in other countries as what it was in America. So like in England, I was just looking at a study just today, and I think it said up to 23% of children and young people are dealing with some kind of disease, ranging from this point to that point, but they're all dealing with some type of major health illness. We're talking about a fifth of the population. Well, 23%, that's almost a fourth of the population of children and young people in England. Now, I would imagine that it's probably way worse in America, and I haven't even looked up the numbers yet. So these are some things that I'm a little concerned about when it comes to kiddos and chemicals. I'm also concerned about what's going on in the school, in the public school system. It's part of the reason why I homeschool my children, because I understand what's in those cafeterias. I'm looking at what's in the vending machines. I'm looking at what they're giving the children when they do well. Like when you do good, you might get a sucker, or you might get a mamba, or you might get you for the child to do well. Now, their positive reinforcement is poison.
Yeah, it's red FD&C colors, dyes, additives, which are highly reactive to the system, or sugar, right? Heavily processed foods. And even when I was in natural health care for 3 years before my daughter was born. So I would make all these like gluten-free, this, that, the third, whatever. And even the social pressures, right? So even though she's going with all this stuff, the children made fun of her. And so she would throw things out, and became this constant battle even to the point where the school even would say, well, your child has said, that there's no food in the house. And I said, that's not true. There's food in the house. Well, she's losing weight. And I said, well, what she really means is that there's no toxic food in the house, because my daughter learned this word toxic food, right? I just want to eat toxic food. And so there was a real rebellion, right? And I really attribute it to, not only are these chemicals very harmful, they're highly addictive too, right? And I told an anecdotal story earlier about my mom, right? And I love her to pieces, and she would totally, be okay with this, but, because she tells the story too. But, she grew up in a time where they had a certain chemical in Coca-Cola, right? And, she was drinking that in developmental years, right? And having the, family history, having the intergenerational trauma that we have in our family line, having a chemical like that, they've since removed that particular chemical, but having something that's going to keep driving dopamine in her brain was actually quite harmful. And so I really, think that we should consider, right? And it's not just the sugar, it's also all of the chemicals, the red, the dye. That's why even with children, when we take these things away, right, they rebel and they crave, and because again, there are chemical reactions that are happening with these foods.
Absolutely. And that's, I was telling my wife just the other day, I say, I like these cashews. They're like the coconut cashews or something like that. But they're soaked in sugar. You can see it all over the cashews. They're roasted, right? Well, I gave him some a couple of times, but we don't normally give him anything that has sugar in it at all. When I give him just 5 to 10 of them, when I put them away, he will scour the room and he will move things to find the cashews. Can barely say cashews, but he will do whatever he's got to do to find those cashews. And I was explaining to my wife, I was like, listen, you got to look at the behavior change that happened just from eating this specific food. When he's eating blueberries or raspberries, or even if we give him certain types of breads, that's not
Yes.
the behavior. After he had some, it's like, all right, cool. I had some. I want some more, Daddy. Nah, you can't have no more. Okay, all right. No, and then he just sits there and whatever it is he was doing in his activities, he goes back to doing them. But when the
Yes.
cashews come out, oh no, you can't just put those away. And if the cashews got finished and he saw them finished, oh, all gone. I want more
Mm-hmm.
cashews. And the
Yeah.
behavior is erratic. It gets slightly violent here or there
Mm-hmm.
from a 2 year
Yeah.
old. So
Yeah.
imagine
So then,
and not imagine, you and I, we already see it, what we're getting from adults who are
of
consuming
course,
these things at way higher levels. But yes, we're talking about
agreed.
kiddo.
Yeah, exactly, precisely. And then so here's what a clue, right? Okay, so when my child is eating cashews as an example, right? Now I'm going to Google what are the chemicals, right, in cashews, right? What are they sprayed with? What are they made with, right? And that chemical compound, right? And I don't know what they are at the top of my head. That's not my wheelhouse, but these are the things that I would look up if a patient came to me and had that, complaint. And these are things that you proactively can look at. The other thing that you can do that I love teaching patients this, because people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on food allergy reaction testing because they go, oh, it's the food. And so now I've got to go and spend all this money. And you don't have to do that, right? So what I like to teach people is very practically, right? First thing, we have to take out all the known inflammatory foods. What are those? Gluten, dairy, sugar, food dyes, chemicals. Also, I was talking to somebody earlier about salicylates that sometimes can be an issue. So we definitely want to look at all of the known allergens, right? And so you can Google autoimmune paleo, different things like that. There's lots of lists. I'm sure I have something on my website or my blog. If not, I can create something really easily. And so the thing is that we want to make sure that we are cognizant of not just our food, but how it relates to our nervous system.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the nervous system. I talk often in official capacities as well as unofficial capacities about what I call the zombie apocalypse. We've got a lot of people out here who are operating, in my opinion, as zombies. They don't have proper control over their nervous system, and they're insatiably running after something. The vast majority of them, that thing is money. And they don't, most of the time, they're not really coming up with a sustainable strategy for how to get that money, sustainable tactics and ways to achieve that money. They're just going after it. And on top of
Yeah.
that, they're damaging their nervous system along the way by eating these foods that aren't good for them. Various types of flour, almost all the types in the store of sugar and salts. I would even argue that we don't need added sugars or salts. The foods
Yeah.
that grow from the earth has the proper amount in it for us already.
Yes, and the things that are enriched, right? When you see enriched, they pretty much pulled the nutrients out and then they put it back in. It's a chemical, right? So that's going to be most of the things that are in your inner aisle. But getting back to the nervous system, right? And not spending a whole lot of money, right? We've been indoctrinated in this concept that we throw money at the problem, and that's not the case, right? So very simply, we can test our our stress response system by using our pulse, right? So you can find your pulse here, you can find your pulse here, we even have watches like Apple Watch and things like that actually will test pulse rate, right? And so we're going to test our pulse rate for a minute. Now, we're not going to go jump in and test it. We're going to relax and breathe deeply, nice, relax. We're going to test ourselves for a minute, right? And we're going to see what that number is. So it can be anywhere, 80s, 90s, wherever, depends on where you are in your day, right? And then you're going to put that food, whatever that food is, in your mouth, right? And you're going to hold it there. You're not going to swallow it. And then you're going to test your pulse rate again. If that pulse rate goes above a 6, meaning let's say it's at 90 and then it hits a 96, that lets us know a stress response. So that's a way you can test. You don't have to guess. You want to test, not guess. And so that's a very easy, free way that you can test to make sure. Because don't believe us, right? That's the thing. I gave up having to convince people because all of these foods have emotional reactions, right? When people say sugar, oh my gosh, don't. When people say, bread, when people say whatever, right? Whatever your thing is, we have the addiction to these foods, and that's on purpose. And that impacts our nervous system. It impacts our emotional system, our hormonal system, our immune system. I mean, I can go on and on.
Absolutely. That biopsychosocial, and I'm missing one, that lower core. But when we think about the whole being, everything is being affected. I think you hit the nail dead on the head about how these foods, or the ingredients of what we're calling foods, these things they're affecting the spirit, mind, body, soul. They're affecting decision making. They're affecting everything. And I really think that the narrative that needs to be moving in the future is that when we see certain types of behavior in schools from children, well, that's a big portion of that is food. You and I both know, and I want to make this very clear with everyone who's listening. You and I both know that it is a full circle picture. It's about the parenting. It's about the food that they're eating. It's about the activities that they have. It's about the individuals at the school. It's about their religious upbringing. It's about the political space. All of these things come into play. But I think that the food needs to be talked about much, much more. And you and I are doing it, but I hope that we encourage many other young people out there to bring these topics to light, because so much of what we're dealing with as problems throughout the world, but especially in America, they come from, in my opinion, core. We're talking about food. We're talking about ideology, ideological makeup, ideological conditioning, right? And these two kind of like spring out of that tree the rest of the branches of a person's life.
Yes, 100%. I did a live last night it was a discussion on intersectionality. And tomorrow on TikTok, we'll have a debate about intersectionality because there is a dissension in the concept, right? So I love intersectionality because it's similar, I can't even speak, to holistic medicine. Why? Because we have to look at, maybe we don't have to, but in order for us to come together, we have to look at how all of these things impact, because it's not one system, right? It's multiple systems. It's the education system, it's the agricultural system, it's the healthcare system. It's all of these systems, right, that all have their own levers that operate off of one system, but it's all still the same thing. Call it what you will: white supremacy, patriarchy, misogyny, misogynoir, whatever label you want to put on it, right? We know that we are being separated from our truth. Erasure is real. We are having to fight. I've had to go into legislation just to protect the ability to tell you, this information, like, and not be whatever. So I think it's really important to understand what we're dealing with, right? And in order to have the proper ideology and proper, we can debate all day long about what proper is. I don't even want to go there. But if we need to have a healthy mind and a healthy body and a healthy spirit for what is about to unfold, the first practical, logical step would be what I'm feeding myself, what I'm eating mentally, emotionally, spiritually, what I'm putting into my body, into my mind, into my spirit, because not everything is good for us, right? I could go out and eat anything I wanted to, but I'm not going to be restricted, if you will, or withheld from the consequence of that. And I know my body because I've listened. And so many of us have been trained in the public school system, which inevitably was a Rockefeller built thing too, right? To ignore and get back on the assembly line and make pennies on the dollar. And we're still living that to this day.
Yeah, I was in my etymological dictionary the other day, and I looked up emancipate, right? So it said one thing. It talked about freedom in my 1968 etymological dictionary, but in my 1892 etymological dictionary, emancipate, one of the definitions is to transfer, right? So what am I talking about? I'm talking about a mindset of slavery that has been transferred at the spiritual, mental, and the physical levels from the state to the feds. And as a result, it never ended. They found a way to do it better. They put an upgrade on it. And in addition to putting that upgrade on slavery, which is sad that this is something that even has to be a conversation that we have, they found a way to kill us faster by getting us to do it ourselves because they was fighting with us too much, and all of these things come into play to create the problems that we have right now. The problem got even worse when they finished up the civil rights movement. They realized, they got the butt spanked in the civil rights movement by people who didn't have the proper amount of resources, and they just whooping them in Congress and in Senate, getting laws changed. Well, nah, you know what? Not only are we going to do everything else to hurt y'all, this time we're going to go ahead and separate that family. Well, now it becomes even more difficult to raise a child up in the way that they should go. So when they're older, they won't depart. Well, why? Because you don't have either the mother in the house or you don't have the father in the house. Mm-hmm. All these different pieces bring us to where we are. And I'm sorry for cutting you off, but all these different pieces bring us to this point, and we really need to heal each one of these pieces. And I think it all starts with what we put in our mouth.
Yes, 100%. I mean, yeah, it's in agreement, right? And I think that it's also an excitement, right? That agreement and excitement combined, that these conversations can live in an open platform. Because I know for so long, these conversations only existed in the dark. And yes. Why is that? Because the powers that be made it that way. And they institute fear, they institute, struggle, they institute all of these things, right? They destroy and tear down and colonize. And so, it infuriates me when this whole concept of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? So, okay, Black Wall Street, an example of that. What happened there? Fearless Fund in the modern day, right? What happened there? And so you can't have it both ways, this circular thinking. And so again, right, we have to empower ourselves. Otherwise, what's going to happen ultimately is that we're going to keep being unconscious, right, keep being victimized by our oppressor, keep helping them, right, out of our own trauma and our emotional wounds that have not healed. Because if we were not allowed to speak out and we had to suppress, what happens? The throat is a two-way channel. Either I'm going to express what I need to express powerfully, or right, I'm going to stuff things down. Dr. Joy said it best. It wasn't like after all of these movements happened, anybody got therapy. They didn't send, anybody in. They didn't study this phenomena. We're still to this day fighting for study of mental health issues, i.e. reparations, right? Everybody thinks it's, oh, just get over it. No, we can't get over it because it's still impacting. It has impacted my family significantly. It affected my mother, my grandmother. This is not like far away. If I don't maintain this, the reason that I pay attention to what I eat, pay attention to what I expose myself to, who I expose myself to, what I think, what I feel, how I connect with my ancestors, all of these things are what I have to do to keep myself balanced, simply because of the impact of colonization.
Absolutely. That's very powerful what you brought up about the generational curses that Western psychological conditioning has brought to the table with their need to control, to divide and conquer. It brings me to think about three laws. And these three laws I often teach in multiple different spaces: the law of suggestion, the law of sacrifice, and the law of reciprocity. But the law that stands out from what you were just talking about concerning your lineage and how y'all have been affected by this spiritual systematic warfare is the law of suggestion. How we have taught the next generation through fear, and each generation, most of each generation, the next generation has made certain choices that kind of kept them bound because of moving in fear, guilt, doubt, and disbelief. So I think about that often. And for the audience out there, if you're not familiar with the law of suggestion, the law of suggestion is basically what we do in repetition we become, right? So anything that we allow into our existence, it is suggestion. It becomes electrical impulses in the brain that we call thought. That if we emotionalize, the subconscious mind now has a picture of what it is to create in an automatic type of fashion, right? But these are things that we need to think about with the children. We need to pay attention to what we're giving to the children in suggestion, because the children don't deserve to have to start life from 50 miles behind the start line. And along the way of that 50 miles, you've got to cross rivers of crocodiles. You gotta do backflips through hoops of fire. You've got to fight off mobs of people. This is just to get to the start line of the race. Our children shouldn't have those types of issues. They should have a fair start line like everyone else. And that requires truth. And without it, no one can be free. They're always going to create a situation for themselves where they bound themselves in situations that they feel like they can't get out of. But it'll be because of their everyday life practices. Their lifestyle will be what is bounding them. We've got to get our children back to a place where they are living off the earth as much as possible. They are embedding themselves in nature. They are learning about the cosmos from actual observation. Some of it, yes, should be from books. They should learn a lot from Neil deGrasse Tyson and from so many other astronomers. But our children need to learn as much as possible from actual experience, from someone who is actively demonstrating in front of them, so that if they fall, we can help them stand back up. But once they become 19, 20, 30 years old, 40 years old, if you've fallen for the first time, that's a hard fall. And there might not be too
Yes.
many people to help you get back up.
And I think also this speaks to the role of a parents in the home, right? And I can only speak as a Black woman and can only speak from the perspective of treating lots of women specifically. But I'm focusing mainly on Black women because we have such this innate power within us, and it creates a magnetizing pull. I don't even know how to say it. It creates this energy around us, right? So if we're good, right, everyone around us is good. If we're not good, even if we don't say it, everybody knows we're not good, right? So that puts a lot of pressure on us, especially if we've been taught to self-sacrifice and give to other people other than ourselves. So I often see this in my practice where like a kiddo is not well because of a lot of chemicals. So they have eczema reactions, skin reactions. A lot of that is because of chemicals. And so, they come in and they're like, okay, don't worry about me. Just focus on the kid. And that there's such a challenge with that because again, you have to teach a whole different lifestyle. So if you're not learning yourself, if you're not getting it yourself, how are you going to be able to teach your children? You're not organically doing it. You're just manufacturing it, which means that it's inauthentic, which means kids today are going to feel that incongruency and not want to do it.
Absolutely. That's a huge point. It's about demonstration. We can talk all day long, but my saying that I say all the time to all the consultees that I have is our children don't become what we tell them to become. They become what we are. So whatever you choose to display in your life is the strongest teaching tool. And as parents get stronger in that understanding, I think that the chemicals will decrease and be eliminated in some households. And in those same households, they will replace them with what is sustainable, the earth, foraging, growing your own garden, going to a farmer's market and the farmers who have brought the food in there. And then at the same time, let's even get past the chemicals that go in your mouth. Let's talk about the chemicals that go in your eyes. Let's talk about the chemicals that go in your ears. We've got to make sure that our children are watching and listening to things that are fitting to what the children have told us is connected to their dreams. Parents, I hope you're listening, because for you to be able to understand this piece, you got to actually be talking to your children about their dreams. You got to ask them what they care about and then help them to cultivate that. And I think that as we decrease these food chemicals, these audio chemicals, these visual chemicals, those spiritual chemicals, as we start to move towards love, compassion, and empathy and activate our maturity, accountability, responsibility, humility, and sacrifice within parenting, well, what we see is an automatic change in the foundation of the next generation. And that's super necessary right now. We're walking into some extremely uncertain times. And without this change, this is going to be a very hard period of time, this next 10 years, for those who don't manifest those principles.
100%. So I'm gonna this speaks to a conversation I had last night with somebody on TikTok. Okay, so shout out to Solo. I'll see you on Wednesday. And Thursday probably at this point. But he's like, okay, we got to get ready. Leave everybody behind, right? Like leave everybody behind that's not interested. Blah blah. And I'm like, wait a second. We've got all these constructs that need deconstruction, right? We have all these challenges and all of these barriers, right? We have to pause, not be reactive. And I even asked him, I said, okay, what day does everybody need to be ready by? So I've got my bags packed. He's like, today. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, we don't know when, right? We know something is happening. None of us really know. So we always want to be in action, right? But we're in inaction. So we want to be in action, but we're like, what do I do? And that analysis paralysis, right, happens. And so what we need to do is just stop, because it's our nervous system. That's why they love the rapid fire. That's why they love all the trauma in the news and here, and oh my God, look at what Trump did today. And, we're running around, and I don't care where you are on the globe. I call it almost the Chicken Little phenomenon, where the sky is falling and nobody stop. We see it all the time on TikTok when, an influencer does something, crass, right? Everybody, and then everybody calms down and they figure out all the things. That is our society. That's the system. That's healthcare, right? That's all of it. It's react, react, react. Don't think. Don't break it down. Don't ask questions. Don't be logical. Don't put pieces together, because if you do, you resist against the status quo, and then you become vilified and God only knows what. So it's up to us individually to come back to self at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Steele. And everybody out there who is tuned in to the Holistic Solution. This is our very first episode. Thank you for being here. We are going to give some great information throughout the coming weeks on how to achieve whole health, how to achieve everlasting life more abundantly. And I want to thank all of y'all out there for liking and loving and commenting and sharing. I know y'all are doing that. Listen, hit us in the comments. All right. And I'm going to post a link in there. So if any of you want to come in and you want to give, a measure, you want to give some information, we would love to hear it. But just for a second, we'd like y'all to hear some of our messages.
My parting word would be this. Make sure that whenever you put something in your mouth, that something is going to complement you, and that it's going to serve you well. It's going to support your nervous system. Because if you don't, you will find yourself stressed. Not only are you going to find reasons to dislike me, you're going to dislike yourself. Glucose is the greatest enemy that you could ever be faced with. Avoid it. Because the one thing you want to do is to love. And that love should begin with you. Once you love you, you love the whole world. It's easy. It's delicious to love everybody and everything.
Listen, y'all heard Dr. Sebi say it. It's delicious to love. All right. Listen, we gotta start living that delicious life. We gotta start living that life where we're focused on love, compassion, and empathy in every step that we take, the way that we shower, the way that we brush our teeth, the way that we eat, the way that we communicate with other people, the way that we drive our vehicles, the way that we think when we're connecting with other people who are on other parts of the globe or those who are in other rooms right in the same house. No matter how it is that we move, we need to move in that delicious space of love, compassion, and empathy. And that's coming from one of the most effective holistic health experts in the history of mankind.
Yeah. And I also want to point out that while I greatly respect all of the great teachers that came before, I think it's important to recognize in our colonized structures that only certain voices have been amplified, right? If we look in natural health, we look at, quote unquote holistic health because it's been colonized. We see mostly white males. Dr. Sebi was an exception to that rule, and look what happened with the system there, right? And so that doesn't mean that there have not been many healers and teachers that have, unfortunately, their lives have been lost. I know after post-COVID, we lost two amazing doctors as well. And so, that were close to me. And so, there was a lot happening. There's been a lot of darkness that's been coming to light. And so now we have, abundance of information. And now I think it's important to organize it and disseminate it. It's not about being reactionary. We always think, when we think about our healthcare, what we're actually thinking about is our sick care, right? We're thinking, hospitalizations, like somebody in the chat on TikTok said, what do you suggest for healthcare hospitalizations, right? Why don't we start thinking about what we can do today? The water, the air, the food, basic needs, our stress level, our basic needs. Let's start there first rather than preparing for the worst.
Absolutely. That's that's super important. So I wrote a book called The Moorish American Guide to Whole Health, and one of the things that not the one of the things, the whole book is focused on the 6 keys of life, and that's what I call them: nutrition, water, sunlight, sleep, exercise, and goals. Right, and if we wanted to really focus on purity, then the seventh one would be religion. Right, and then we actually do the principles and the ethics of that religious practice, right? But either way, we need to get back to these basics. We need to look at what our ancestors did. It says in the Bible that we should honor thy mother and father for thy days to be long upon the earth, right? Well, the individuals who wrote those scrolls, who were they talking about? They wasn't talking about, Mama Thutmose. They wasn't talking about, they wasn't talking about their mother or their father. They were talking about their ancient ancestors. What were they doing, right? How were they living? How are they worshiping? What are the practices that they had? Yeah, we need to get back to as much of that as possible. Now, obviously, we live in houses now. We have electricity, we have running water, we have toilets and all of that. But we still can embed ourselves in nature more. We still can get out there and get sunlight more. So, before I get deep into that, we've talked a lot in the podcast about problems, right? So now we're going to transition into solutions. There are for the different types of issues that we've talked about. Let's say like ADHD, for example. Well, there's different herbs that are good for these different problems to help bring us back to equilibrium.
I'm going to stop you right there because that is the westernized model, right? So I go to the system for a diagnosis. What's a diagnosis? It's just nothing more than an educated guess. It's a sophisticated labeling system, right? It's a way to describe what's happening. And so we go to someone else for a label rather than knowing for ourselves. Like, none of us have an owner's manual for our bodies, right? And many of us, even if we were taught in quote unquote health class, it was subpar education. We know that. And also it was all whitewashed and colorless. And here's what I'll also say, right? So we have to get out of this, like, this is my only ideology, and so I don't talk to anybody else, or this is my only ideology, so I don't talk, or this is my only intersection, right? So as a for instance, right, my co-host here gets wild with the FBA, right? People on TikTok know how I feel about the FBA, right? And we can have fun and talk about health, right? My co-host is self-trained, right? I'm formally trained. And we can have a conversation that honors each other, honors our intersections, comes together in respect. I've been mind blown about some of the things about astrology and things that I would not have known had I would have not come in contact with my co-host. So the thing is we have to drop what we perceive as divisive, and we all have to come together as Black people, regardless of what flavor Black person that you may come out as, FBA included.
Well, I think that's a great point. When we talk about, and just for everybody who's listening, and thank y'all for liking, loving, commenting, and sharing. But just for everybody who's listening, when Dr. Steele uses words like colonizing and colonizer, I want everybody out there to understand that we're still operating right now. Our society is operating by a Roman system to this day. Many of you still use Roman numerals when you're writing numbers, right? People are living in a European society right now and may or may not know it. Many of you out there who are college educated and you're a brother or your sister, you're real popular, you might have been in a sorority or in a sorority or in a fraternity. And I could almost guarantee you that sorority or fraternity, its background isn't directly ancient Kemet. Now, if you go back far enough in the history of it, the real origin, you might find it there, but you're wearing Greek letters. So much of our society from the top to the bottom is westernized. So whenever Dr. Steele is using colonized or colonizer types of words, these are accurate. Right. I want to make sure that I clarify that for the crowd that may not
Yeah.
understand where it's coming from, because
Well,
that's
yeah,
important.
'cause they blaze me out because they don't realize, right? I've been doing this work for like ever since, right? Long time, 20, 30 years. And so, 20 years professionally, obviously, 30 because of my childhood. And so, learning and learning and learning. And so this is my reduction, right? I've reduced down to you're either a colonizer or you're being colonized. And it's a mindset. So I have to, when I go into spaces, I'm conscious of not colonizing, not taking over, right? Giving space and giving room, right? But also not being colonized either, standing my ground and speaking my truth and saying, this is me. And I'm not going to go into kind of this, amorphous state to make everybody else comfortable. I'm not going to keep shrinking myself, because me making everyone else comfortable around me, number one, was costing me my life, but number two, was costing millions of other people's lives. And so that's why we have to get this information out to people. So that means that you got a little bit of knowledge, I got a little bit of knowledge, I'll brag you hard about the FBA stuff. But the reality is that we're coming together, we're putting that aside, and we're coming together to support each other and build and grow.
That's a fact. Building and growing. This is very important. And understand, parents out there, right? We're talking about kitties and chemicals today, and understand that the period between birth, or really the moment of conception, all the way up until, let's say, 7 to 9 years old. This is a very critical period for what your child is putting into their body, what they're putting into their mind, what they're putting into their ears, the secretions of their skin, right? What they're putting in through their third eye. All of this is very, very important. It is structuring the foundation that child who becomes a man or becomes a woman will move forward in life with. And the things that they achieve will be a direct reflection of what happened during those first 7 to 9 years. So these are things to really think about. And I think that every parent out there take some knowledge from what Dr. Steele is bringing to the table, and let's move forward. I think one of the best ways we could start in our moving forward process is to turn off those screens as much as you can, right? Unless you're actually focusing on a purposeful type of entertainment that's going to help elevate your life in some kind of way, turn that TV off, put that phone down, put down that tablet, pick up a book or something like that, or maybe just have a conversation with someone who has some wisdom. And these different small changes, subtle changes, will also reflect in your children and the decisions that they make. And they will reduce their chemical intake, because now what y'all are taking in is love. Y'all are taking in compassion and empathy. Y'all are taking in truth now.
Yes, exactly. So we created a checklist, right? We're going to go to, I love what Jelly said on TikTok. She talked about, she's in agriculture, and she talked about, going to, more ethnically sourced stores. So more of like Indian stores or Asian stores, et cetera. Those are pretty much everywhere because they're going to source mainly from their providers. You have farmers markets, which are in your local area, right? But you have to speak to the farmers. Don't just assume because they're at a farmers market that they've got everything. Ask them what their growing practices are. Do they have a farm? Do they have what's called community supported agriculture, where it's like a farm buy-in, where you get, a certain share of whatever they grow. And that can go good or bad. Usually the good ones are, waiting list. So that's a challenge. Really growing your own is the most economical, but it does require a little mind and, sweat equity on that. And if you're, just absolutely all you can do is a grocery store, make sure that you stay on the outside. Remember, everything on the inside is probably not living, not well, not safe, it's cut shelf life and things like that. So definitely stick with more of fruits, vegetables. I like to keep it really simple. If it's God made, eat it. If it's man made, stay away from it. You don't need any kind of education to know when there's tons of chemicals and stuff. But if you do need some resources, there's some really good ones. EWG.org. I encourage you to watch their YouTube, their TED Talk on 10 Americans, talks about all of the chemicals in 10 Americans who weren't even actually alive yet. They tested 10 Americans in the womb, one of which was the gentleman's child. And originally they thought that the chemicals didn't pass the blood-brain barrier, but they actually realized they do. So we're getting the chemicals. And that study was done a long time ago. And now you think on the political stage, they're fighting to dismantle the EPA. And so if they don't, because of corporate greed, so if they don't have those protections in place, imagine, Flint, if we heard anybody from then, how's the water going up there? You know what I'm saying? Like, we have some real issues happening environmentally. And I definitely hope over the course of this, we'll release those resources. Thank you guys so much for being patient. We literally threw this together. I was like, hey, let's do this. Like, we got to go. And let me tell you, I just have to give you your kudos because you hung in there. So I'm a tough cookie. Anybody that wants to train with me, don't play with me. Okay. Because in order to be the person that you need to be, in order to deal with what you're dealing with the ego, you got to be organized and all in one pocket.
You got to be ready.
You absolutely. So he survived the hazing, not the Greek kind, the steel kind, or whatever my original name was back in the day. So he survived it, and this is the production of that. So we're really excited to be able to bring this to you guys.
Absolutely, it's been a blessing, and I appreciate the challenge because it makes you grow when you have to push past something where, like, maybe if it was a fraternity, I might know, okay, all right, boom, I just got to make sure I'm listening. I got to do what Big Brother says, and boom, I'm gonna be in because they like me. We go out, we drink together, right? But in a situation like this, it was different. There wasn't really a need on Dr. Steele's end to bring in any new recruits. So I'm gonna just keep pushing.
I know. I just have to say this. People think I'm so pressed. Like, no, people will track me down. When I was on, this is why I'm in the witness protection program. People would literally, from Laskin Road, which, if you don't know anything about Virginia Beach, Laskin Road's this big road. It's busy, and my practice was on it. They would stop their car, come into my practice, I don't know what this is, but I need to talk to you. Like, I don't know what you do. Something told me I got to go. So when you've got a magnet like that, you have to be, and you have an energy like that, and people show me their best and their worst all at the same time. So I'm desensitized to crazy, right? But so I know what I'm dealing with, right? And so I make sure that people are prepared. Physician, heal thyself. Make sure that on all cylinders, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, because there's so much that's going to be thrown at you. And if you really want to make a change and help people transform their lives, right, and not just do it on paper or do it for money, but actually make true impacts where people can literally say it was because of this experience that this made that transformation. So the hazing is real, but it's necessary because nobody will be walking around saying Dr. Steele said, and then be doing straight trash work. That's not going to work.
No, that I think it's important to do the hazing. And this is the reason why. There's a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes. And in chapter 5, I think it is the chapter on hiring superstars. And Chet teaches that you should reject each candidate and see how they handle these rejections, on you're asking them questions like, hey, do you think you can do this job well? Why do you think you could do this job well? And then you just give them a hard time over and over again, and then you really get to see which ones are going to bust or which ones is going to transcend. Because it either busts pipes or it makes diamonds, and
Yeah.
that I think that is important when you're stepping into this space, because we're talking about the actual solution here, right? So if you got people out there who really want the solution, they'll do the work necessary. They'll put in the time necessary. They'll develop the proper amount of self-discipline. But if they think it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I can make $50,
Yeah.
a little tiny bit of hazing, you're out. You're not going to keep pushing
Exactly.
forward on this while somebody else is like, bow in the head every time. Now get up out of here. Stop it. What are you doing?
These
You don't
are,
really want
yeah,
this.
I have open practices and I have closed practices. And, I have to see where you fall on the grand scheme of things, because the thing is that, you know, you have to be ready, because most of the time people are co-opted. They don't know what they don't know. I don't necessarily like the term generational curses. I like generational trauma. So people are carrying around trauma from many, many generations that have been passed down, whether they are the colonizer or the colonized. They've passed it down. And it seems like the colonizers don't want to see that, and they keep running away from that fact. And to be clear, I'm partially colonized and partially colonizer, just because I'm a Black biracial. So I understand this intimately, which is why I always check my colonizer, right? And check my colonized, because there's a part of me, right, that neurologically pulls to being oppressed, that pulls to being traumatized, that feels like, the learned helplessness, the powerlessness, the hopelessness, that despair and suffering is so familiar, right? And so I have to keep that in check. Same thing with the colonizer. That's the patriarchy. I'm going to run over top of you. I'm not even going to think about it. I'm going to get this done. I'm going to tell you after. If you don't like it, deal with it, right? Like the short, the shrewd, the to the point. It's all about money, 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 time, energy. All that is the colonizer. And even me as a woman and as a Black woman, I had to still look at that pieces, because I still was doing it. Why? Because I have both. That I'm working through. So that's trauma. And I'll leave with this. I did a plant medicine ceremony. This was so telling. I did a plant medicine ceremony with my dad and my cousin on my dad's side. And I was negotiating with my ancestors about how much trauma I was going to take on, like processing wise, because this has been going on for a lifetime. And so I'm like, no. And I'm literally suffering. I'm literally like, I mean, the noise, it's audible. Like I'm like giving birth practically. And what's happening and what's going on is very deep. And, unconsciously, consciously, right? My father's over here in the distance, right? And he's laughing and he's making jokes about, my trauma, right? But look at the dynamic, right? The colonizer and the colonized, right? That was so powerful. And I later integrated what that meant, which, we'll get more into that. But I want you to understand the dynamic, right, that exists. Our pain is not seen, but also too, our pain is fetishized, and our pain and our trauma, it's like it's fed on. It's an enjoyment. It's a pleasure response. So as Black women specifically, to respect ourselves, it's removing away from and deconstructing. I don't care how nice a person may seem, if they have not gone through the work and deconstructed their unconscious biases, and they have really unpacked on multiple levels, mentally, physically, environmentally, emotionally, spiritually. And people, again, like you said, to your point about doing the work, people avoid doing the work, and they want to stay stuck and sick, and then involve other people in their trauma.
Absolutely. And those other people that they're involving in their trauma are called their children. and what they're going to have to start coming to the reality of, all of us, because we all slip in this. Some slip more than others, but we all got to come to the reality of is that we got to check those egos. We've got to check that inner self. We've got to check that quote unquote devil and that angel, or that colonizer and the colonized. We got to check those. We got to create this avenue where they can be fused together so that we can have the whole of each, because that's where the truth is. That's where those diamonds are,
Yes.
and like I said before, I want to thank everybody who's came and took part in the first episode of the Holistic Solution. Dr. Steele and I were going to be coming to y'all every week on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 12:30, and on Thursdays, just so everybody understands, that's like a Q&A. That's like a question and answer period. So please, when we send the link out, come on in the studio. Feel free to bring your questions. We've got one of the most effective doctors in the whole world, naturopathic doctor, and she was serving, still is serving Virginia, but she was physically here serving in Virginia for a very long time. But now she's moving throughout the world, doing her, living her calling, and we have her here every week so that we can get in touch with her direct. TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, her website. I've been putting the links up there. I hope y'all been writing them down. Click on them, go there, support Dr. Steele.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you because you've been running after me for so long to do this. And I finally was like, okay, you talk about something. Let's get it done. So I am so excited by your questions. Just speaking of which, there is a question on TikTok by Line BB. I don't know how to pronounce it. Hopefully I pronounce it right. Hi, Dr. Steele. I hope you're doing well. What's the best food to reduce inflammation? So first things first, inflammation is a response to something. What is our body responding to, right? So it's about what we're putting in. So we don't want to put in any high inflammatory foods. What are high inflammatory foods? We talked about it before. Sugar, dairy, bread, pasta, rice can be an inflammatory food for some. Gluten is a high inflammatory food. Definitely reduce gluten if you have inflammation, especially in your joints, right? Again, really work on, juicing is also really helpful, especially to help filter things out. Lots of hydration and water, because you got to move the chemicals through your body. Because if you've been eating a lot of chemical food and your body's generating inflammation because it's trying to protect itself, you definitely want to flush first. A lot of times people want to skip to the food or even the exercise, and they skip over proper hydration, and that is absolutely key, because really we're just hydroponic units, really, I feel like, as humans. So
Yeah, it's a lot, and we've got to work together, and that's how we're going to be able to move forward. And I think that with all of that said, did you have any more questions from TikTok?
Nope. I think we're good for right now. And then also too, we're going to get our stream key and get it all figured out TikTok, so you guys can have a visual too while we chat. And again, Tuesdays and Thursdays, right after my show, Decolonize Your Healthcare. So that show is really about mindset. And then we roll right into solutions. So we'll get your mind right, because, we've been indoctrinated, and then boom, we'll come in and we'll talk about solutions to make sure that everybody's on the right page, the same page.
Well, we have come to the end of episode 1, the Holistic Solution. We are making history today. Please continue to be a part of this history that's being made. We're coming from different parts of the world, and we have a similar message on how to help you achieve everlasting life more abundantly, how to become whole again, how to walk out of this system and still live your life in a comfortable space, right? That's what we're going to be given on the Holistic Solution. So y'all be blessed, and we look forward to seeing y'all on Thursday. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much on TikTok. I'm going to drop the live right now, and I'll chat with y'all later.